All right. We do have in studio with us, we are joined by Ambassador Boaz Mbaya. He's a former Kenyan ambassador to France and Ethiopia. We also have with us Ambassador Maria Nzomo, who's a professor at the University of Nairobi. They join us now in studio to talk a little bit more about the foreign relations and the issues that we've just seen in that story moments ago. Thank you so much to both of you for joining us tonight. I'd like to start off by asking you, Ambassador, if I can start with you, but has the West softened its stance against the Kenyatta administration? Is that what we're seeing?
I don't think they have softened their stance, but they have no choice but to deal with President Kenyatta. He is elected by the people of Kenya, and he has a mandate to run this country. But we understand that the issues affecting him at the ICC will have to be dealt at the same time. That is a judicial process, it's not a political one.
Right.
So in my assessment, they are behaving correctly because they cannot avoid to deal with Kenya under these circumstances.
All right, I want to come a little bit more and talk about consequences in just a moment. So let me take this to you. And essential contacts, we've heard that term over and over again. Define it for us. What does it mean?
Essential contacts basically means on just the necessary relations which must be carried out because we have not broken diplomatic relations with these countries. They must, obviously appear at certain official gatherings of Kenya, ceremonial occasions, but they would not want to be seen like they are, buddy-buddies. Of course, this was a statement they made initially. That's not what is really happening in practice today.
Exactly.
And I think that needs to be seen in the context, which was just before the elections, as you recall. Because in practice now what is happening is that they're having more than just essential contacts.
They're having what you'd call the non-essential contacts? Is that the term for it, so to speak?
Well, more than essential contacts.
More than essential.
Yeah.
Is that unusual?
It's not unusual in diplomacy. In diplomatic practice, countries do make certain statements, sometimes just to test the waters about how the country to which this is addressed is going to respond. And in this case, I think their intention was to see whether this could get Kenyans to actually, vote differently from the way they voted, by bringing this kind of very subtle threat that, this kind of thing, there would be consequences.
You're free to weigh in at any point, but I'll also ask you another question. But Kenya really in the past hasn't had a clear foreign policy, and I stand to be corrected. Do you think we'll begin to see more clarity with regards to foreign policy between the Kenyatta administration and the West as well?
What Kenya has not had is a document defining what our foreign policy is. But we have had a foreign policy right from independence. When you look at Session Paper number 10 of 1965, it spells out the foreign policy of the country. And that's what has actually obtained since then until now. But we have also had successive governments, KANU and NAC, and now we have Jubilee. So the foreign policy of this country varies to a certain extent depending on who is in power. It is not true that we have not had a foreign policy. No country actually does without a foreign policy.
Yeah, it just hasn't perhaps been as clear, maybe, to what a lot of people would say. Now, what would you say about President Kenyatta perhaps scoring highly on the diplomatic front at this point, having, of course, attended the IGAD summit? He's now going to London. What are your thoughts on that? How is he doing with regards to the point mark, if I may say so, on the diplomatic front? Any of you can comment on that.
What I can say is this. One, Kenya is an important country in this sub-region. In terms of the East African community alone, it has something close to between 60 and 65% of the GDP. You cannot ignore a country like that. Two, President Kenyatta has himself undertaken to cooperate with regard to ICC matter. He is not under arrest. There is no warrant of arrest that has been issued. Therefore, his movements have not been restricted. And I think the Western countries are going to realize if you want to achieve peace in East Africa, Horn of Africa, and the Great Lakes region, you have to deal with Kenya. If you want to deal with the humanitarian aspects, you have to deal with Kenya. The infrastructure Kenya has in the sub-region is second to none. And I think Kenyans may remember when we went into Somalia in hot pursuit against the Al-Shabaab, it was a game changer.
Right.
And that has been acknowledged internationally. So those things put together make President Kenyatta somebody who is going to be sought after.
Okay, I'd also like to throw in this particular question. If President Kenyatta had a warrant for his arrest, would he have still received the same kind of treatment? Would he have been invited to the United Kingdom? Give us the background on that. Would that have been possible?
Going by the recent UN reaction and the way the UN Secretary General explained the changed position, you recall about 2 or so weeks ago, he asked the various officials of the UN who working in Nairobi, not actually just in Nairobi, but elsewhere, to take a slightly different position regarding those who are considered suspects in terms of crimes against humanity, and actually took the position that actually we have to make a distinction between those that cooperate and those that do not.
Okay.
And in Kenyatta's case, he has cooperated. Now, if it came to a situation where there is a warrant for arrest, it very much depends on how our president reacts to that.
Okay.
If he continues to cooperate, then I think the international community would continue in the same way.
All right, we're running out of time. You want to comment, and then I can throw in
personally,
very
I
briefly.
think no warrant of arrest is going to be issued unless he clearly says, I'm not going to cooperate.
Okay.
Yeah.
Final question. Likely consequences. Are there any at all? We just saw in the story initially they talked about there being consequences, if at all. We voted in President Uhuru Kenyatta and Deputy President William Ruto. Will it be business as usual? Will there be consequences? Or what are your thoughts on that very briefly as we wind up?
I think, like I said earlier, I think that was a threat meant to see whether they can get some response, immediate response, in terms of, especially Kenyans voting differently. Now that it is quite obvious that is not happening, they voted in Kenyatta, and the entire region seems to be, directly backing the regime.
Okay.
Then my view is that it's going to be fairly business as usual, very cordial relations, unless, of course, something dramatic happens, which we don't expect to happen because our president has been fully cooperative
All
up
right.
to now.
Your final thoughts as we wind up the interview.
I think consequences only if President Kenyatta refuses to cooperate. And that then will depend on what the court in The Hague decides. It's not a political matter.
Okay.
It is how the court process is going to be undertaken.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for that, of course, Mr. Boaz Mbaya, and of course, Ambassador Nzomo. Thank you so much for taking time out to talk to us. It'll be interesting to see how the visit will pan out and, of course, what's likely to happen for those relations. We're going to now move on with other stories that we're following for you tonight. And even as the international community prepares to discuss ways of stabilizing Somalia at the London conference, the reality on the ground is that Al-Shabaab militants are not about to relent in their quest to regain control of Mogadishu and other key towns in the Horn of Africa County. Now, Al-Shabaab leaders have claimed responsibility for today's attack that left 11 people dead and scores injured in Mogadishu when a suicide bomber rammed an explosive-laden car into armored vehicles carrying Somalia's interior minister and Qatari officials, as Esther Kahumbi now reports.